All right, wanted to show that little video to kind of get us started here tonight. My name is John St. Pierre. I'm going to host tonight's conversation about New Hampshire varsity esports and getting esports in our middle schools, high schools, and recreational programs, and have a great panel here today with us, and want to go ahead and introduce them to kind of get us started. So first off, and if you guys can give a little, quick bio of yourselves as well, in addition to mine, but I'll start off with Tim Edmonds from Helix Esports, Director of Programming with Helix Esports. I've been in the industry for quite a while now. And Tim, as we talked about before a little bit in the past, give your background from your traditional sports background into esports and really what you've been doing with high schools since you've been involved in esports.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. So background in traditional sports, I've basically played traditional sports for as long as I can remember, kind of playing any sport under the sun, like basketball, hockey, lacrosse, and actually ended up playing lacrosse in college at Harvard University. But just like I was playing traditional sports my whole life, ever since I can remember, the first time I picked up a Dreamcast controller, which was, I don't know, maybe when I was 9 or 10, I've had an equally great time playing video games, and I've enjoyed it equally as much. I have two younger brothers who both play video games as well. And just like we were competitive with each other in traditional sports, we were just as competitive from a video game standpoint. And that ended in some fun times. But yeah, enjoyed both pretty much my whole life. And now, like John said, I'm the director of strategic programming at Helix Esports. I've been there since its inception in 2018. And one of my first projects was building out our high school esports league in the Hudson County area. And that's when I met Nelson, and then we had North Bergen coming in, as well as Memorial High School and Nelson Works, and competing in a few different game titles. And we really had a great time. And that was pre-COVID, and we're hoping to get back to something very similar as soon as possible.
That's awesome, Tim. Thanks a lot. Next with us tonight is Erica Conklin, who's one of the co-founders of Helix Esports Academy and also the executive director of our Exeter, New Hampshire location. And we can see you there in location, there in action tonight. Looks like you got some esports athletes behind you, Erica. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in sports and now esports, and a little bit of what's going on here in Exeter tonight?
Sure. Thanks so much, John. Yeah, so I'm here at the rinks at Exeter, where we have our Helix Esports Academy Exeter location. And tonight we have our Fortnite team practicing with Coach Matt and Coach Allison, roaming around and helping and coaching the kids. They've started out with some practice, some warm-ups, and then they're going to go into a little bit of a tournament later on. So I'll be on mute a little bit because it gets pretty exciting and noisy in here. The excitement is high. My background, I have two gamers, and I was not traditionally a gamer. I was an athlete growing up, really looked to athletics to keep me out of trouble and keep in shape. And now with two young kids who really love to do both game and play sports the traditional way, I'm embracing it both. John says it a lot: if you can't beat them, join them. And we've both kind of caved and really recognized that there are so many opportunities that esports affords. So here we are doing it and really enjoying our time here at the Academy of Exeter.
Awesome. Thanks, Erica. I can see the appropriate social distancing going on there as well. So I certainly appreciate that. And that's necessary during these times, not only you, but also the athletes behind you as well. So that's fantastic. And then certainly last, but certainly not least, our guest of honor this evening, Nelson Maldonado. Nelson's a mathematics teacher at Memorial High School in West New York. He's been there for approximately 7 years, graduated from New Jersey City University. Division III baseball player, and got into esports at Memorial High School. I'm assuming, Nelson, you play and have a passion for esports, as well as potentially being the coach and a founder of a high school program. So can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got involved in esports, and what you've been doing over the past few years at Memorial High School?
Yeah, no problem. So I'm Nelson, and he kind of gave you the quick background on me. So yeah, I teach mathematics at Memorial High School in New Jersey. Just like Tim and Erica, I do have a background in athletics. I mean, I've played baseball since I was probably 5 years old. I grew up in a family of athletes. I played collegiately, so I have that long track record of playing sports. In terms of just esports, I mean, I've always been a competitive person, and obviously as an athlete, you need to be. But you know, on days off or after practices and I'm home and I'm done with my homework, I was on a console, I was on a PC, right? So it's just, you know, that competitive drive can be mirrored not only in a physical aspect, but, you know, the mental aspect, kind of like if you're playing chess, right? You have that mental capacity to go ahead and succeed in whatever esport you're playing. And then in terms of starting at Memorial, so you know, I played, you know, online competitive gaming. So like in, you know, during as I was growing up, online competitive gaming started becoming a thing. People would have tournaments online, you know, and then once in a while you go to a LAN event or things like that. And I was never a professional, not to that standard, but I, you know, I could compete with, you know, these amateurs at all these different events, and you create a networking, and you create some friendships that are there through online gaming and through in-person gaming that, you know, stand the test of time. And my younger brother is actually a more of a semi-pro in Call of Duty, so he has much more of a, I guess, a new generation style of close to being professional. You know, esports player in that aspect. So I kind of know, I understand the grind that it takes to be someone at his caliber and understand, you know, the hard work you put into it. But it mirrors very well with traditional sports. You know, as all three of us here, we're all now in esports and driving that. But we've all have athletic experience, and there's so many things that mirror it so well. And everything is pretty much the same. It's just you're not hitting a ball or, you know, jumping high or, you know, running laps or whatever you're doing. So that's the only difference, is you're taking some part of the physical aspect out of it, but hand-eye coordination is still there. You know, the quick thinking, critical thinking, being able to communicate, all that good stuff is still there. So in terms of Memorial, so you know, we started there. I am the lead advisor officially. I do act as a coach, but oftentimes you find yourself that in specific games, the kids are going to have much more knowledge than you, especially if you don't play that game specifically, right? So kids might log, you know, hundreds of hours in a specific title, but you may understand how the game is played and you may be aware of the specific game, but the ins and outs are definitely, they might know more than you. So you kind of, you know, share your leadership skills a little bit. Obviously, you know, I'm the lead guy, I'm the adult in the room, but at the end of the day, you ask your kids to kind of you know, rise to the occasion, show some leadership, show some collaborative efforts to, you know, to compete at their level. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Certainly, I've heard you know, that saying many times, which is it's very hard to find coaches in esports that are better than the esports athletes themselves. Maybe they know what the game is, but really it comes down to the pure basic tools that you need to be a coach in anything, right? Leadership skills, communication, getting the group working together, and a lot of teachers in schools have that ability, you know, just in their general skill set. So talk to us a little bit specifically. Take us all the way back to before Memorial had an esports program, because a lot of the people that we're talking to today in New Hampshire, middle schools, high schools, rec programs, are starting to look into starting their program. And I think tonight we really want to zero in on, you know, bring us back to that moment of who started this program at Memorial exactly? Who did they engage in the administration? Maybe what were some of the roadblocks they encountered just to get started from a communication of even saying, let's try this. Can you walk us back to that point?
Sure. So let's say the talks might have been happening around 2017. We officially started competing, I believe, spring 2019. You know, it's a few years in the making. The way it kind of started is, you know, I do have a good relationship with my students. You know, obviously I'm a math teacher, so I'm not everyone's favorite. But you know, as classes go on, I try to line up the conversation a little bit. So, you know, whether, it could be about various different, conversations we can have. And oftentimes a lot of students will come up to me and talk to me about video games because, I'm an avid video game player. I still play video games. So, I kind of have, I can hold a conversation with the students about it. So I think a few years back, a group of kids came up to me and they came up and they initiated it and they asked, hey, did you see that some of these schools have esports teams already? So, it's very early on, and they were doing it all online based and stuff like that. So, I was like, oh, that's a great idea. I was like, why don't you guys try to start a club? And they're like, wait, we can just start a club? And I was like, yes, you can just start a club. You just need to have an adult be there for you, right? So you need someone to volunteer. So then they kind of all looked at each other and said, wait, would you do that for us? And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, if you can get, enough kids to say, hey, I want this to actually happen, I mean, I don't mind, going through the paperwork and helping you out with that aspect. I'm like, it's also fun because, I'll get to play sometimes too. It's not,
Sure.
It's one of those things where it's not much work on myself. I'm
Yeah.
just the adult in the room, but in terms of, setting it up and getting it going, it wasn't a big deal. So as we kind of got going, I realized that, okay, this is not going to be as easy as just saying, hey, we want to start a new club. Let's meet on Wednesdays. Here we go. So there's a lot of things that come into play when we were talking about this. So
Okay.
the first thing I needed to establish right away was just creating a leadership group. I didn't want to do like a traditional president of the club, vice president of the club. I didn't want a singular leader. I wanted kids to kind of bounce back ideas off of each other. So I created a committee itself. So we had about 7 to 8 people that were on this leadership committee. And the
Were
way I
these all
kind of,
students, Nelson, or were they a
yeah,
mixture?
they're all students. I mean, I'm obviously part of the leadership committee, but the conversation, I'm usually I play the admin role. So when they kind of present me with something, I say, well, I play a little bit of devil's advocate and say, okay, well, how can we go against this? What's
Sure.
the way we can uh, manipulate this so that way it's not seen in a bad eye instead of in a good eye. So
Sure.
um, so we had this leadership committee. So certain things came up. They wanted to do competitive, they wanted to do casual, they wanted to do a lot of different things. So I said, okay, well, why don't we start first just creating a casual club at the school, students only, nothing outside of school, so that way we can kind of create a buzz around it, just try to see if we can hold a certain amount of students in the club, right? Because numbers matter, right? If you have only 10 kids that want to do it and our school's 4,000 kids, that's not going to cut it, right? But if you can show that you have a following of 150, 200 kids, that's a good percentage of the student population, and it's something to pay attention to.
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
so growing numbers was a good thing. So we sent out surveys through Google Forms. We asked, okay, what are you guys interested? If we were to have a club, what games would you guys want to play? We just piqued interest, and we held one of our first pre meetings to kind of just see what the numbers look like. And we actually had to hold this in the auditorium because there was just so many kids that were interested, right?
That's awesome.
So which was it's great. So then, okay, so now, and then I had I also have a second teacher with me because of the size of the group.
Yeah.
So, we work together and we say, okay, well, we actually have something to work on.
Yeah.
So first stop is administration, right? So how do we get this approved? What, hoops and loops do we have to go through to get this going, at least at the social aspect, right?
Sure.
At least in our administration, what we came to realize was they said, okay, look, um, in the beginning, they said, we don't have a budget for you to work with.
Mm.
So they said, what can you do? And I said, well, look, if kids are willing to, at that time we were just doing consoles, if they're willing to bring in consoles, we have the smart boards where we can hook up a console to, it's the center of the classroom, we can go ahead and play some games. The Switch had just come out, so the Switch is very portable and mobile, which is an excellent device to use. So we started there. We said, okay, and kids were willing to, because again, they want to compete with other people, they want to meet new friends that they traditionally would have never met before because of this club, which is one of the greatest things I've seen come out of esports actually. Kids start to come out of their shells and things like that.
Yep.
So we got it going socially. We did a few events. We held, Super Smash tournaments. Kids played FIFA, some Madden, a lot of different casual games. We had a Mario Kart day, a Mario Party day. So like, things just to get the kids together. And then okay, administration saw we were holding numbers and everyone was there. So the one thing is that they kind of didn't push forward, at least in our administration, they didn't push forward with, okay, you're going to get a budget so you can actually buy things to keep them in house.
Sure.
They kind of realized, well, if you guys can bring them in and play it and nothing happens, then you
Everything's
guys can
good.
stay that way, right? So that's one of the downsides to it.
So Nelson, if I just want to take a second here to kind of recap what I think I heard from you, right? Is it took a little bit of time to have conversations initially. There was interest, and okay, you guys were kind of in the position that I think a lot of schools are across the country that are thinking about doing this. Is okay, what's next? And I think what you're articulating here is the way to get started is to create interest, and the way to create interest is to create a club, not a varsity team, but start off with a club. Start a little bit smaller, survey your population of students, see who's interested, have a few different events. Obviously, right now with COVID, students may be remote, so it's a little more difficult to have the auditorium and packed up with students. But certainly as we approach next fall, hopefully that's possible. But I think the key message here was start with a casual club, all-inclusive casual club, right? As low budget as possible and create the buzz. So I just wanted to make sure we capture that. I love what you talked about too with the student survey, Google Forms. I know that Erica, we've talked a little bit about it'd be really good to get samples of that survey to be able to send around to New Hampshire schools and say, here's an example of a survey you can use for your schools that we would like to provide them. So, and I guess I want to come to Tim. Did you know Nelson during this period that they were setting up the club, or was it a little bit later that you guys got a chance to meet?
No, it was later. So this must have been a year or two into that journey that Nelson just described. But when we had just opened Helix, this was fall of 2018, Helix North Bergen, that is. And I remember one of the first couple months, Jared Kashijian, who's the coach and director of the program at North Bergen High School, had come in. And they started running practices and tryouts for their esports team. So we were just doing outreach to other schools. And I think around that time is when I met with Nelson and they started coming in and using the facility as well.
Okay, so maybe that ties a little bit back to, we're watching over Erica's shoulder and see all these thousands of dollars worth of equipment. And if I'm a high school, I'm thinking, wait a minute, like, let alone get a team going, we don't have the budget for this right now. So Nelson, bring us back to that point where, players are bringing consoles in, you're trying to figure it out. I'm assuming you sought out places like Helix Esports centers, LAN centers, they call them, and/or at some point, did you guys evolve to having your own computer lab-ish esports center? Can you walk us through that evolution?
Yeah, no problem. So, believe it or not, once we had things rolling on the social end, that's when I got an email from Tim. And it wasn't directly from Tim. Tim sent it to administration, but because they knew that I was running the esports club, that email trickled down to me, and then that's where our relationship started. I think it was towards the end of the fall. So I think North Bergen had already been there for a while. He's just trying to gather up and see how many other schools are interested. And towards the end of that fall, 2018, we had this conversation, and then I said, okay, well, now this is a real thing to transition to. Now, we still have the social club aspect of it, right? So we still want to pique that interest because that ties into things like fundraising and just having, just kids interested. So that we never shied away from the social aspect of it. But what we decided to do is we decided, okay, how can we transition into competitive? So then this is where we had to kind of narrow down what games are we playing. Tim had already an idea of what games to play. Obviously, we had some coaches meetings just to see what we could even field in terms of teams. So that became a separate conversation, but we had an idea of where we wanted to go. And he presented one of I think the lineups he presented initially were things like Overwatch, League of Legends, Super Smash Brothers. I think those are the three that we started with.
Yep.
And then I believe later on we added games like Fortnite, Rocket League. So we grew upon the core games, but we stuck with Overwatch, League of Legends, and Super Smash, because at that time, that spring, I believe 2019 is when Super Smash first came out.
Gotcha.
So so that was a conversation with administration, and actually, Tim and Helix, they did a wonderful job that spring. They kind of, I think you created 2 tournaments that spring, and those 2 tournaments were very track style, and they just got us in there to see if a league could even be formed, right? So we joined those tournaments, and there was no cost. Helix, the Helix guys took care of everything. It was just to see if a league can even take place in our area with the schools that were in this tournament. So that first tournament, we field our teams. Once we get there going, permission slips signed. We had to get permission slips, parent consent, all that paperwork stuff on the back end had to get done.
Sure.
And then once we check all those boxes, then all it was just get the kids on the bus, let's go to Helix, and let's go compete.
Okay.
And I made sure to invite my principal from my building to this this
That's a good call.
because I said, okay, look, it's either going to hurt me or it's going to make us. And at this point, I'd rather take that chance because, if he just sees the environment, he's going to love it. And he's going to say, this is something I think we can back in the future. So the event was a success. We turned out to be, we did decently in certain games, and then we realized that we had some pretty good Smash players. So then you start to get kids are able to gauge themselves against other schools. So now they're saying, okay, well, now if we're going to do this again later on in the year, I need to come back better, stronger. Kids are all excited, and that was just a great mix of emotions from those kids that first day.
Yeah, that's phenomenal, Nelson. I appreciate you going through that. I mean, it really takes you from the casual club to the moving to the elite level side of it. Erica, you have a thought or question?
Well, yeah, I mean, you mentioned Nelson track style event, and with my athletic background, I go to, okay, so I'm doing the hurdles, the 100, I'm looking at the track layout of what the event looks like. Okay, I know that the hurdles are happening at approximately 3 p.m. and the 100's going off at 1. Is that how an esports tournament works, where I'm in a building and you've got everything laid out of which games are going to be played? Can you walk us through a little bit what a live tournament looks like?
Yeah, so I'll talk about it from our point of view, and then I'll let Tim talk about that because obviously he's the guy, pretty much running these things. So from our experience, at least the tournament style of things, because we did transition into more of a traditional league style setting. But for the tournament styles, it was pretty much, one afternoon, and their facility is pretty big, and they can house, tons of PCs at the same time running. So they're actually able to run all 3 games simultaneously. So what happened was you'll have, the Smash group in one section, you had the League kids in one room, the Overwatch kids in one room, and everyone's going on at kind of at the same time. And they were actually able to set it up to where like they had maybe 6 different schools playing at the same time, playing Overwatch. They're all competing. There's a buzz, there's the environment's insane. You just hear kids communicating and going back and forth, and it's a great environment. So when we talk about the track style meet in terms of the way we did things at Helix, there is just everyone's playing at the same time. So I'm going back and forth, just facilitating, keeping up with kids if they're off, just having a conversation, how did it go, stuff like that, and just making sure everybody's okay. I'm just bouncing back and forth because at the end of the day, again, they're the professionals. I'm there to facilitate, right? So I'm there to ensure that health and safety are good, everyone's okay. And then I'm just going back and forth and encouraging the kids to do well. And then Tim can take it from here in terms of how they set up the tournaments.
Yeah, so that was pretty much exactly right. We ran all the games simultaneously, and this was like season 0 for us, like Nelson said. So it was just kind of like let's see if this is something we can even do. And the first couple events were, I would say, a smashing success, where everybody, like Nelson said, had an awesome time. We had their principal in there who really liked the environment. So we knew we had some more support from several administrations of the schools that were competing. And so that was pretty much season 0. And I believe we did that again the following fall, which was fall 2019. We did kind of something similar where it was track meet style again. We reached out to other schools. We said, who else would want to get involved in something like this? I think we added a couple schools. And then after that, it was like, for the spring, let's get all the coaches of the different schools together. Let's get them, everybody in the same room with me and our director of ops, Patrick, and let's figure out how we can make this into something that was like, okay, let's see how this goes, to like, okay, let's try to talk about what an actual esports like varsity level league looks like. So we had myself, Nelson, Jared, who I mentioned earlier. We had Jerry from Union City. We had Kearney in the building, Beckton Regional, just to name a couple schools that were in the building. And we were like, okay, how do we make this an actual league? And then we ended up, Patrick and I sat down and we created a schedule that was basically like, I'm sure a schedule looks like at an active hockey rink, where one school's coming in right after school, like 4 p.m. They're practicing till 6, and then maybe another school's coming at 6 and practicing to 8, and they're coming in twice a week, and then we're laying out which day of the week we're competing. And that was when we started to like kind of stagger the games a little bit, just in case you have someone who maybe is really good at Smash but also wants to try maybe competing at Overwatch.
Sure.
Then maybe he can play both of those games, as opposed to track meet style where like they're coming in and they have to stick to one game because all the games are going at the same time. Sure. So we all sat down and we had like an awesome meeting, and we had a great plan for what an esports league was going to look like. But unfortunately, we got interrupted by COVID, because that was right smack when that was happening. But we had done some excellent preparation. I think the league was going to be awesome, and I look forward to maybe seeing what it'll look like down the road.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to get to that in a few minutes too. Like, what do you guys think post-COVID is going to look like? Because if you're thinking about starting a program right now, you should be thinking about the future, not necessarily the current environment. But I want to come back on a couple of points. One is, I want to get back to the budget question, Nelson. Like, does Memorial High School now have a budget for this sport, or is it self-funded? Do you guys have a center at your location, or do you use a center like Helix for your team? How does that work budgetarily at the moment?
All right. So budgetarily, we've had conversations of, do we want to house our own, I guess, center, or do we
Yeah.
want to continue to use Helix? Okay, obviously that's a financial question for them. Obviously long term, it may be smarter to have your own center, right? Because I mean, I'm sure costs down the road, if you cut the costs at some point, if you pay for everything, then you're not going to have reoccurring costs. However, the problem with that is games come out every year. You're gonna have to pay for games. Eventually graphic cards, things like that. You're gonna need new ones. You're gonna need updating all that, right? So, in that aspect, it's kind of like, okay, which one are we gonna go with? And then in terms of, we always used Helix, and we still do. Right now, obviously during COVID, we're not there. So anything online has to be done where the kids have their own PCs or consoles or whatever they're working with.
Sure.
So it does limit the amount of kids exposed to it, because we do live or I do work in an urban setting. So there's a lot of socially, economically disadvantaged students.
Yeah.
So therefore, not everyone has a PC sitting at home, right? So that's what was beautiful about Helix, especially for our school and our situation, was that now everyone's on the same level. It's not, because you're more well off, you have more access than someone else. It's like everyone has the same access now.
Yeah.
So that was beautiful about that aspect. Again, obviously, if we had our own center, then that would be great, because our school itself is providing that for them. In terms of what budget we have, right now, the only budget we have are to cover pretty much my expenses as the teacher in charge of peer student contact time, and then the expenses for buses to and from Helix, and the expenses for Helix when we play there, right? So that's pretty much what we have in our budget for that. And again, like right now, this season, that's all shot down the window because of everything prepping for COVID costs and stuff like that. So obviously, this is just not your
Normal
traditional,
environment.
Yeah, not your traditional year.
Okay.
And then the way I kind of propose, at least for our land center, just in case anyone is interested in just doing it at a land center versus not, I always think of it as like a bowling team, for example, right? How many schools have lanes in their building, right? Uh,
Yeah.
Probably very minimal, if any, right?
Yeah.
So what do? Well, you rent out space at a bowling alley, just like everyone else in your league, and you all go to the bowling alley,
Yeah.
and you guys, pay costs for renting these lanes, so that way you can use them for practices and games.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same idea with Helix,
Yeah.
at our aspect, and they do it. Helix does a great job of keeping costs down minimum, to a minimum for students, and we actually get some kind of discount, and then we have set days for practices and games.
Sure.
Uh,
So if I'm a high school, or middle school listening to this, you really have three choices, right? You do it from home, which is absolutely a possibility, but you then deal with different internet connectivities, different levels of PCs, disadvantaged kids who maybe don't have the proper equipment or PCs.
And then
You
you
would,
also, sorry to cut you off. I didn't
yeah,
mean, but you also deal with, you're at home, you have distractions at home. So like if you're in a competitive environment, mom's knocking on the door saying, "Come down, your food's ready,"
yeah,
and you're in a match, then you start, you don't want to have that
sure.
conversation with mom saying like, "Well, he needs to play right now," So there's no
Yeah.
less distractions if you're not at home,
It probably sound
obviously.
like me yelling down the basement, "Stay, get off those
For
kids!"
sure, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. But they're in a competitive environment, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so there's the at-home version, right? Which is everybody plays at home. It's all virtual. We manage it that way. There's the complete other extreme where you build a center like we see Erica's at, or a lot of colleges are now doing that. And then there's the middle ground, which is you find a location where you can do this, right? And then maybe that is a local college. Maybe that is a center like Helix. Maybe that is, a land center near you, which, sometimes depending on what market you're in, they're few and far between. But there's a way, whether you have nothing as a budget to get started or you build up into something further. So that completely makes sense to me. And I think that really as your population of students grow, I'm assuming just like any other sport, you mentioned fundraising, but can you tell us a little bit about what you guys have done there on that side of things for fundraising?
Yeah, sure. So for fundraising, I mean, fundraising has done a lot for us. Fundraising has gone from, you know, so we did a big uniform jersey thing for the spring season, but obviously the season got scrapped last year.
Sure.
But all my kids have jerseys. All my kids have their own gear if they want it. So we did a fundraiser for that, and to pay for our jerseys, what we did is we would run in-house tournaments. Okay, and all we would do is we would charge kids $2 or $3 fees, just to take part in the tournament. We will have little prizes for winners, but we use that as kind of a way to just get some funding for us, because again, in our aspect, everything the budget takes care of the competition portion of it.
Sure.
So we needed to find ways to pay for things, aesthetically, if we wanted jerseys or things like that. And kids always they were pushing for jerseys, so that was a big thing for them. So in order for us to do that, well, we decided to fundraise using tournaments. There was actually one day where we held kind of like a karaoke night, where we did a competition amongst all the clubs in the school for
Cool.
karaoke night, and then it was like a 50-50 kind of deal, so where we kept 50% of it, but then the other 50 went to the club who did the best performance, and we had like a panel there, whatever. So like you have to get creative, obviously, and I'm sure a lot of other teachers and administrators know this. When you fundraise, you have to find ways of doing it, whether you're selling healthy snacks, or
Sure.
whatever you're doing. You're going to have to put in the grind and the work to kind of just get as
Yeah.
much money and funding as possible that way. So yeah, there's different ideas you can do, but tournaments are obviously the easiest, because then you're keeping all the kids in your club involved, and you can do a very low cost, and that starts to add up, and then you can have some money that way. Now it's
Yeah.
not nothing astronomical. Again, we used our fundraising specifically for clothing and jerseys, so that was kind of a set budget for that. But
Okay.
I'm sure if you're budgeting for consoles or things like that, then you may need a quicker flip around in terms of getting some money.
Sure. Erica, I know that talked a little bit earlier that you're there with a Fortnite team that's playing in your center tonight. I know you had some questions about parental consent, first-person shooter game type of stuff. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that and your question for Nelson on that area?
Yeah, so Nelson, I was just wondering, there's been a little bit of feedback, and as a mom, and allowing my boys to play different games and not really understanding, is Fortnite too mature for them? Is Call of Duty? I see these words first person shooter, and it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. But as I've become more aware of what these games are doing and the graphics around them, or maybe the cartoonish images, I've personally become more comfortable. But as you're presenting to a school board or your administration, how do you approach that subject? Do you start with more of a FIFA and Madden? It sounded like in the beginning you were talking more FIFA, Madden, and Mario Kart. And then do you move up to the next level? Because that is some things that has been a little bit concerning to me, and questions that I've gotten quite a bit.
Okay, and then I'm sure Tim could talk about this too, because he actually was one of the people that actually helped me get Fortnite approved in my school.
Oh, cool.
So we'll eventually get there. So in terms of starting out with the games, obviously we started out with more casual games, right? We just needed to get population numbers. We needed to get to show them that this could work.
Mhm.
Then when Tim came to me and we started competitive, the games he introduced to us were Overwatch, Super Smash, and League of Legends. Sorry. So those are the three, right? So now Overwatch and League of Legends are both teen rated, and then Smash I think is E10, right? So Smash, I mean, all the kids were playing it in the school during their lunch period because you could bring a Switch in. So I mean, that wasn't, and the characters, everyone knows those characters. You're talking about Mario, Pikachu, so Kirby. These are all characters that everyone knows, so they're all have a good stigma to them. So then we get to League of Legends and Overwatch. So now, when someone reads I guess the description of League of Legends, there's things like cigar use, things, tobacco use, things that may not be so friendly, right? But I always say, well, you have to look and see how the game is played, right? The tobacco use is basically a character that's drawn that may have some kind of tobacco use in it. Is there active tobacco use in the game? No, there isn't. Actually, the game is played from an above position where you don't see characters. So if you looked at the screen and saw it, you would just see someone clicking on a mouse and telling a character to go to a specific position, right? So it's actually a very high knowledgeable game, and it's a resource-based game where you have to farm to gain resources, and then these resources are used to increase your character's level and its ability, so that way you can move forward and take down the enemy base. But it's overhead, so there is no real violence or anything on screen. It's all done overhead, so you don't really have that interaction. But again, if you read the description and you just do a quick Google search, it's going to say that in the description. Well, it's going to say everything that the game has, obviously, but there's no gore involved. There's no, real violence. Well, there's violence, but not to the extent where like you would see it and you would say, "Oh my God, this should be an R-rated movie." It's nothing along those lines. Because again, Super Smash is E10 specifically because it has fantasy violence. All right, so violence is just two characters interacting and doing damage towards each other. That's what they consider violence. Then we had Overwatch. Now, Overwatch is a first-person shooter. Okay, now when they talk about first-person shooters, they're talking about games that have weapons that shoot projectiles towards someone else to produce damage, right? So it kind of replicates that of a gun. Now, if you were to watch and play Overwatch, you can see that all these guns are fictional. You have a hog with a hook, and he throws the hook, and he grabs the hook, and he grabs the character. You have people who use magic and mage. You have guys with a shield and a hammer. So they're all very different. Yes, it's a first person shooter because there are some characters whose their weapons are these fictional guns, but it's controlled to a point where there's no gore. It's very cartoonish. When there isn't a thing as a kill in these games more have an elimination. So you're eliminating your opponent. And then obviously your opponent comes back to life in a respawn. And then you go that way again, right? So there are no lives, there are no kills. It's kind of like you have eliminated your opponent, and then your opponent respawns and comes back into the game. Now, Fortnite was always the harder one to get into because Fortnite was just, I think if you said the word Fortnite, I think 90% of the population will know what you're talking about, right? Because that game just was grown to the masses. But they do have more, they still have cartoonish guns, but it is a little bit more segueing into what a gun might really look like. So again, that's why we had a little bit of trouble in the beginning getting Fortnite approved. But what we kind of just jumped on in terms of that is we started a season with no Fortnite. We had our administrators come to the event. They saw the kids competing and they saw what Fortnite looked like firsthand. Because again, you just need to see it, I think. And I think administrators need to see it. Even if you present the game to the administrator, show them videos. There's enough videos on Twitch, on YouTube to just show them what the game is, right? And if you show them that, you show them like, this is what's happening in the game. These are kids, how they're competing. You may be able to get off of that stigma where it's a first person yes, it's classified as a first person shooter because that's the game genre, but it's not necessarily something that replicates something you would see in real life, right? So these are all cartoonish style games that just implement a gun style projectile weaponry. And then Tim can talk to you guys on how they kind of just spoke to us a little bit about Fortnite and why it worked out. Because we ended up using the leverage from other schools that were doing it in our league to help us do that. And then there's some things that he definitely knows about Fortnite that makes it a little bit easier to present to, I guess, a parent or an administrator.
Yeah, let's hear it, Tim. 'Cause I'd love to hear kind of that angle of things. Specifically, Fortnite is one of the most popular games, and I know some schools carry it, some schools don't. Can you tell us a little bit more about that angle and how you involve the parental communication, involvement, consent in that?
Yeah, well, I think I think the main point was what Nelson first said was that they competed in that first season, and North Bergen walked away with a Fortnite trophy, while Memorial High School wasn't even allowed to compete in Fortnite. So they had this awesome trophy, but their rival Memorial High School wasn't able to even compete, so they didn't have a chance to go for the trophy. So I think that was a major sway point, and I think Nelson touched on that. And then I think the second big one was just the fact that we honed in on just the communication, like the intangibles you're building from competing in it, as opposed to looking at it from a negative light. It's like these kids are learning those intangible skills, just like you were in the other games that aren't frowned upon. So I think those were honestly just the two big selling points. And those combined were enough to get a couple schools on board with Fortnite, because I mean, we don't see it in a negative light at all from our perspective.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I was going to ask earlier, and it came up perfectly. And when you guys were talking about is, how have you guys handled the negative stigmas from other teachers or people in the administration? I think one of the biggest things you said twice was really bringing them to the actual event and showing them what's going on. And I last night for the first time witnessed a Rocket League team, a 3-person Rocket League team at the center in Exeter, New Hampshire, playing against a 3-person Rocket League team from California. And how exciting that was to actually watch the game and see them with their coach and celebrate. It was no different than watching an actual sporting event. And it was pretty cool. I can imagine that getting them involved is probably one of the biggest ways to handle stigmas. Are there any other ways that people should consider handling stigmas with their administrators or other school teachers, thinking that, hey, that's game, why are we bringing that in here? Or this is violent, why should we bring that in here? Any thoughts on that?
I think go ahead, Nelson.
No, you can go first.
All right. Yeah, I think that someone who is going to talk down on it, but is not willing to do the research to actually look into it and see what's actually going on, that's someone that you just should not listen to, or should just not be a part of the conversation. But if they're going to talk down and then they will actually go do the research, then I believe they will have the capacity to actually do the 180, where it's like, okay, they'll be able to see the benefits and understand the benefits. So I think the only people who really, really talk down on it are those people who are just going to reject, and are not going to put in the time it takes to actually understand. And I think, Erica, you said this too. It's, if you can't beat them, join them. Like, obviously these kids are so infatuated. They love these games so much. There has to be positives in that. So I think just really having someone just do the research, or having links you can send them, or even like something like this where you're going in or listening to real people have these discussions about how this has impacted them positively and have impacted the people who have competed positively. So I think just doing research is just key.
And then just to kind of play on the whole athletic vibes of it, right? So, I mean, we live in a country where high school athletic sports have been around for forever, right? But I mean, just think about how violent some of these sports are, like especially the contact sports, right? I mean, I love football, right? I love football, love watching it. You know, I like watching lacrosse, I like watching soccer, but some of these sports are very, very violent, right? And, you know, as a competitor, there's some things that are said on the field that probably aren't as sportsmanlike that, you know, you may think, right? So and obviously these are things that happen between the lines, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of violence that's occurring on these ball fields that you're putting, you know, these teenagers through, really. But one of the things, I guess, in terms of the stigmas is, at least in my district, the teachers are all very supportive, right? So, you know, I have good relationships with a lot of my coworkers and a lot of colleagues. So in that aspect, they're all very supportive of the kids, because at the end of the day, you know, if a kid is interested in something and they're willing to put the time commitment, and they really care about something, then that just shows that, you know, they're maturing, and, you know, they're how do I kind of word this? But they're interested in something outside of school that kind of just create a you know, they can network with other kids. They can um I'm kind of fumbling my words here. They can network with other kids. They can speak with other kids on different topics, and they're making friends that they've never probably would have made before because they just decided to join this team, right? So there's a lot of social benefits to it that are there, and students and teachers can see that alike. In terms of administration, like I said, when my principal came in, he saw it, he loved it, he was on board since then. So again, it's just a matter of just bringing them to the light, seeing that. And what we do sometimes is, like, we'll record events, and you'll see the kids competing. And what we do a lot, because our administration is big on this lately, is there's a big push for social media. So our administration loves Instagram, our administration loves Twitter, and anything we post on there, we always tag the school. Obviously, it's you know, filtered. We make sure that everything is clean on there. You know, there's nothing bad on there, but we do show gameplay and stuff like that, and we just show, like, look, these are what our kids are doing, and they're competing at this level. For example, last spring when the season was canceled, we actually entered into a free tournament with our uniform vendor for Fortnite, and some of our kids made top two. So they, you know, we were following it along, posting it everywhere. They were retweeting it, things like that. So they see it, and then they, you know, it's something for them to brag about. Hey, look, our school has esports. You know, not that many other schools have it, and this is what we're doing here. We're supporting our school system. So I think just getting them involved as best as you can, getting them to see the games, because once they give you the yes, you know, then you just make sure you take care of, you know, your little baby, and just make sure that that vehicle it just stays safe and clear of everything, and then you're pretty much good. I don't see why there would be any issues.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, certainly to the point you're talking about community, you know, it's great that schools have athletic programs. I mean, all four of us played traditional sports athletics when we were in high school, but there's a lot of kids that are sometimes left out of that, but still have incredible talents. And esports is a great equalizer in that sense, because it doesn't matter your gender, your religion, your race, your athletic ability. You can compete and win and be part of a team and communicate and have that sense of community. So that's one of the parts that I love the most about esports. I want to pop quiz all three of you guys now with this one question, right? Tim, you've had a lot of opportunities to work with high schools or set up esports programs. Erica, you've set up an esports program and team, and Nelson, certainly with Memorial, you've done the same thing. What is one thing you know now that if you had to go back and start over again and recreate your centers, your high school clubs or teams or whatever, you would do differently just because you've gained more experience? So what is one of the biggest things you've learned that you'd recommend somebody listening who's going to start fresh? Hey, here's something I've learned over time. Do this.
Kind of a tricky question, so I'm just going to go with the very first thing that pops in my head.
Yeah.
At one point towards the end of our like track meet style events, so we had like 4 of them. I think by the 4th one we had, so when you broadcast an event to Twitch, usually just like an NFL game, you have someone who's shoutcasting.
Yep.
You have someone who's calling the game. Towards the end of that, we actually had some students from the different high schools who weren't necessarily competing in the game at that moment, who were calling the games. So they were getting some like shoutcasting experience. And I think that was like a massive moment for kind of all of us, because I think one of the biggest things about having a high school program is not only do kids maybe get to compete and have a great time and maybe even compete at the next level, but maybe if they don't want to compete in gaming, maybe they can be a shoutcaster at the next level. Maybe they're interested from an audio visual perspective, and they can get some experience and get some knowledge from that perspective. So I think I would have had a much larger, more tuned focus on not just the gamers themselves and the games being played, but maybe some of the skills in the background. And I think Nelson touched on social media too. They had some managers doing that. So just kind of just a full perspective outlook on it rather than maybe just the gamers.
I love that. That's great. It goes back to that equalizing and including everybody, because there's a role potentially for everybody who wants to be a part of the club. You don't just have to be the gamer. You can actually be somebody who's promoting the club. You can be somebody who's involved in it. So Erica and Nelson, how about you guys? What comes to mind?
So something that comes to mind to me is almost a little bit opposite of what you're saying, Tim, but I 100% agree that there is a spot for anybody. But I've really noticed, and Tim, you actually, your experience plays right into this with a great education and a background. On one of our last calls, you talked about going to work, basically a register at one of the tournaments to get your foot in the door. I think that there are so many people in our community that are passionate gamers that have this knowledge, and they're excited to share that. Until you open up and you start talking about what you're doing, you're not going to find that. But I have been absolutely astounded in starting this community here and finding people who are coming to me, these colleges that are knocking on our doors and saying, hey, we really want to support, we want to partner with, this is great, we're trying to launch, let's get together and do this together. Coaches at the college level, players who are also working at Starbucks and going to college. All of these people are coming to us and saying, how can we get in? How can we help? How can we grow the love of this sport? So I've been really thrilled with that outreach.
Yeah, that's a great point, Erica, too, because I can imagine, just like in one of the videos we showed a little bit earlier, there's probably a lot of parents that have gamers as kids, that they love gaming, and maybe they don't follow in traditional sports footsteps. And those parents probably would get behind these programs too and help things going at your school if you involve them and reach out into the community and see what the support level is. So Nelson, let's end that with you. What's one thing now that if you had to start all over again, you would have done differently or change because of the knowledge base you now have?
I mean, there's a lot of just different obstacles we had to get over. Maybe not necessarily something that I can change, but maybe something that, a little bit of an advice for anyone who's trying to start the club or the teams that are going on is that you're going to hit roadblocks, whether it's budget, whether it's administration, whether it's, parents pushback, not having enough kids. Just try to be as creative as possible, right? So if you have a group of kids that really want to see this through, use their energy, use their commitment to you as the lead advisor, and try to bounce off that and use that energy to just go at it in all different aspects, right? So like when we were stuck fundraising, we were just, throwing ideas at each other, trying to figure out a way, right? Find a way, because this is a growing, it's a growing industry. But obviously in terms of the high school setting, this is you're starting to see more and more clubs, more and more competitive teams in a lot of high schools throughout the nation. So it's not going to be too long before it's part of the norm, right? It's going to say, hey, I'm on the varsity esports team. Oh yeah, and in the spring I play varsity baseball. So like it's not going to be too far down the road before that happens. But my thing is, like, if you're starting out now, just find ways. Um, whether it's administration, if they say no right away, well, then you say, okay, well, if I take this away, how about now? Or if they say yes to this, try to add something else on top, right? So like, just always push the envelope a little bit. I know sometimes administrators, they just say, hey, get out of here, Maldonado. Like we're done talking to you for the day. Like leave us alone. But I think if you go in there kind-heartedly and you just try to, push the envelope a little bit, and I think you'll get what you need to get done. And always ask for value, for money and budget. So like in the beginning they were too risky. They said, well, you have to get your own budget for going to Helix. And then eventually they said, okay, look, we'll cover that because we saw what you guys did in the spring. It was great. We'll do that. And then they said, well, we can't really pay you for it. And then I was like, but I am with the kids for a certain amount of time and I have to take them back, make sure they're safe. So like you just push the envelope a little bit here or there for whatever you're trying to do with your club, and
Yeah.
and you'll start to see results, right? And just don't be scared to speak to an administrator or try to get even if you have to hold like a Google Meet with parents about the video game club, like just try to make them feel as comfortable as possible so that they agree to what you're going to do with the kids and the club. So as long as you get the backing of a few people, then you can build on that. And I would just say just be creative as best as you can, and again, let the kids run a lot of it, right? They're going to be your guiding force, right? They're going to tell you what games they want to play. They're going to tell you what they want to do. Just facilitate that. And then obviously you're the adult in the room. So you're not going to let kids run rampant, but they do need to abide by certain rules. So that's the only thing I would say.
Awesome. Great. That's fantastic for sure. And I've taken a lot of notes here because it is interesting that you have to almost go about it a certain way as you've walked us through tonight to work your way into building a club, to a varsity program, to getting buy-in and building from there. It builds momentum as you go. So I love that. In closing here tonight, what would you guys recommend if there's one place or one association or whatever it may be where you can get information for your high school program or middle school program? Where would you guys recommend they go? Is there a national association that you guys belong to at Memorial High School, or you guys are just independent?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of us and there's a lot of things out there now, right? So I mean, you have HSEL, you have EGF, you have tons and tons of high school leagues that are starting to form. Just like with the NCAA and colleges, like there is no one law-abiding. Like the NCAA hasn't picked up esports yet. For the NFHS, right? I think that's the law-abiding one for the high schools. They haven't picked up esports yet, right? I think certain states have, but it depends on your state sport affiliation. So there's a ton of them out there. Some of them are online only. Some of them have land-based stuff like Helix. I would just say at this point in time, just look at your local environment, right? So we're lucky. We live in like an urban district where there's literally a town right next to each other. Like we have just in a stretch of like 6 miles, you might have like 7 different towns, right? So, we're lucky that all these different schools are here already. So we can all kind of convene to Helix. So I would say just go with what works best, right? If, you're in a very rural area and the next school is 20 miles down the road, maybe in person may not be the initial one. You may want to start online because it's just more convenient to you. In terms of getting information, I mean, a lot of these different online programs have different pieces of information. What I would do is I would, go to all these free webinars that they're offering and just get as much information as you can from them, jot down notes, and then see what vision you want to take for your club or your school, right? So that's something that I would do. Because again, when we got into this, it was kind of just like club. Okay, now we're going esports and we're doing it in person locally. And for us, going back to online is so difficult because now we know what in person is.
Yeah.
You know, once you taste in person, it's a different game. You know, it's the competitive juices get going, and it's really, really fun for everyone involved. So you know, I'll sit there and watch Tim, and Tim's having a blast just listening to the kids play, and like he's not even competing; he's just there facilitating. You know, so you know, it's a great time. But yeah, so I whatever is best for you in your school, in your district. You know, again, it all depends on your certain situation. We're lucky to live in like a city, urban South area where you have 12 schools in a matter of 15 miles, so they can all convene at Helix and kind of get things going. So it just all depends, really.
Okay, great. Tim, any quick resources you would throw out there, or any closing thoughts for this evening?
I think one that I like when I had just started doing a ton of research, I signed up for a Esports Observer, which is like a magazine, online magazine. They post some great articles across a bunch of different like platforms. So it's not just like you'll get some high school information, but you also get information at the pro level, like the semi-pro level, like different partnerships and what companies are involved. And I think you'll be kind of blown away by these massive companies, just everybody who wants to get kind of their foot in the water in esports, just because they see it as something that is kind of in its infancy now. And right now even feels like it has a ton of energy, a lot of forward momentum. But I think it is in its infancy and it could go to large places. So I would just take a look at that and just see what companies are involved and just how much action is taking place.
Okay, that's great. Erica, any closing thoughts from you tonight?
No, I mean, I have been learning all along, having gamers in my house and flipping the switch and really being on board with this. So I'm jumping on a bunch of webinars, as you mentioned, Nelson, listening to people, you know, how to get better at coaching, because that's a big part of what I've heard about. What do you do if you don't know how to coach? Well, you can get some tips from webinars. So I've just been hounding the internet for different opportunities to get better at any of the pieces. And there are so many. There are so many people out there who are very knowledgeable, and they are so willing to share that information, which is a fantastic environment to, in my opinion, be a part of.
Yeah, that's great. You got to tell all those kids to stop having fun back there.
I know I have to keep muted because they're so loud. They're now running around because I think their tournaments are ending, and they're so loud. So I'll stay muted, but they're really loud here.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Thank you, Erica. And Nelson, Tim, thanks a lot for your time this evening. This was very informative, and to your point, you know, a good resource that we'll be sharing with New Hampshire programs for them to learn a little bit more about your path and how you got started, because there is a process to this. You don't just start something overnight and boom, here you are. And it does take engagement. Students, teachers, administrators, parents, you know, it takes everybody to get behind the students and their passions. So yeah, thank you very much for all of your time this evening. And we look forward to seeing Memorial High School program grow. Tim, you and your Helix programs continue to grow, and Erica, you as well with the Academy. So I appreciate everybody's time.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
Have a good one.